Imagine this. You're at the peak of your abilities, but the world around you isn't ready for your speed. You feel you can achieve more than the rules allow, that your potential is constrained by conventions. Does that feeling resonate with you? What if I told you that once, in the midst of the most massive war, such a person not only survived but became a legend, rewriting all the rules and challenging established notions of heroism? This is a story that begins in 1944, when a deadly game unfolded over the scorching jungles of the Pacific Theater of Operations. Japanese aces, the elite of aerial combat, were confident in their undisputed superiority, but they didn't know they were being hunted by more than just an enemy, an elusive phantom whose maneuvers bordered on the impossible. This man wasn't born a hardened killer. He was a simple farm boy from Wisconsin whose love for the sky surpassed all reasonable limits. How did this seemingly ordinary youth achieve 40 confirmed aerial victories, setting a record that remains unbroken to this day? And what truly lies behind the title of America's Ace of Aces? Today, we will unravel the mystery, how audacious self-confidence and untamed talent transformed an ordinary man into the most lethal pilot in the U.S. Army Air Forces, and why his methods were so unorthodox they could have cost him his career before it even began. Stay with us and watch until the end, as this story is full of unexpected twists. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. While Bong honed his innate piloting skills, the world plunged into the flames of global war. On the European continent, the Nazi war machine crushed one nation after another, leaving only ruins in its wake. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the Japanese Empire waged a merciless campaign of brutal conquest. By 1941, the United States remained a sleeping giant, but the winds of war were already sweeping across the ocean, foretelling the inevitable. Bong, like many of his generation, felt the call of the sky and of duty. He entered the Army Air Force's Aviation Cadet Program, driven not by a thirst for glory or recognition, but by a simple, profound, and almost mystical love for flight. His instructors noticed it immediately. This guy was a natural pilot. His talent was undeniable. He didn't just fly a plane, he merged with it, turning the cockpit into an extension of his own body and the controls into nerve endings, reacting to the slightest thought. However, as is often the case with geniuses, this outstanding giftedness was accompanied by a dangerous, almost reckless trait, a restlessness that soon pushed his career to the brink of collapse before it even started. At Hamilton Field in California, Second Lieutenant Bong was introduced to the most advanced and, arguably, the deadliest fighter in the American arsenal, the P-38 Lightning. He fell in love with it instantly and irrevocably, and this love almost destroyed his future. Official, censored, and archived reports merely document a series of unauthorized aerobatics. But in reality, it was far more reckless. Bong treated the sky over San Francisco as his personal playground, where no rules existed. He flew his P-38 so low over Market Street that pedestrians could see every rivet on its wings. He performed loops around the Golden Gate Bridge, a blatant, breathtaking violation of every conceivable norm and regulation. He certainly boasted of his skill, but he was also testing limits, his own and those of the aircraft, which became a living entity in his hands. Stay with us and watch until the end, as this story is full of unexpected twists. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. His commander, General George Kenney, was a man who tolerated no reckless stunts or disregard for discipline. He was a strict but brilliant tactician in charge of the entire 5th Air Force, and his decisions were law. When Bong was brought before him, expecting a full grounding and a disgraceful end to his career, he faced a true storm. The reprimand was severe, a dressing down that would have broken a less resilient man, making him doubt himself. But Kenny, with his discerning eye, saw something else in the young pilot's gaze. It wasn't arrogance or youthful hubris. It was confidence. An absolute, unwavering mastery of his machine, bordering on intuition. He saw what the flight instructor had seen before, a prodigy whose talent was too great to simply suppress. Kenny, one of the war's most astute commanders, made a decision that changed the course of the air war in the Pacific. Instead of destroying the young man's career, he forged him into a weapon, honing his talent to perfection. He kept Bong under his direct command, assigned him additional, intensive training, and then unleashed him, knowing that this man would find his own path to victory. By September 1942, Bong was sent to New Guinea, the true front line of the war. It was a brutal, unforgiving battlefield where American forces desperately tried to halt the Japanese advance, and every day was a fight for survival. The Japanese pilots he was about to face were not novices. They were battle-hardened veterans, masters of their craft, fighting since 1937 and accumulating invaluable experience. They flew the Mitsubishi A6M-0, a fighter so agile, so legendary, that it could outperform almost anything the Allies put into the sky. On paper, a farm boy from Wisconsin with relatively few flight hours had no chance against such aces. But Bong wasn't flying an ordinary plane. He piloted the P-38 Lightning, designed by the legendary Clarence Kelly Johnson at Lockheed, a true genius of aviation. The P-38 was a monster, a revolutionary aircraft unlike anything else in the sky, and it became the key to Bong's unique tactics, which we'll discuss shortly. Its twin-boom design, powered by two roaring Allison engines, provided incredible speed and astonishing climb rates, giving it a decisive advantage. Most importantly, all its armament, 4 50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, was concentrated in the nose. This was a critically important design decision that distinguished the P-38 from most other fighters, where wing-mounted machine guns had to be angled so their fire converged at a specific point. Shoot too early or too late, and you'd miss, losing precious seconds. However, the P-38's firepower struck straight ahead, forming a concentrated buzzsaw of lead and high-explosive shells. If a pilot could hold a target in their sights for even a fraction of a second, the result was complete destruction. But the Lightning also had a dark side that made it a killing machine not only for enemies. The aircraft was notoriously difficult to master, requiring exceptional pilot skill. Its advanced turbochargers were temperamental and demanded constant attention. During high-speed dives, it suffered from a terrifying phenomenon called compressibility, where shock waves formed over the wings, locking up controls and sending the pilot into an uncontrollable plummet. Dozens of American pilots had already died just learning to tame this beast, underscoring its unpredictable nature. Japanese air combat masters were well aware of Allied tactics. They lured American fighters into low-speed, maneuvering dogfights, where the Zero was king due to its incredible agility. An American pilot attempting to turn with a Zero often perished in seconds, becoming an easy target. Richard Bong didn't try to maneuver. In his first combat sorties over Buna, New Guinea, he didn't rush headlong into battle. He observed, learned, and calculated every move. He saw the Zeros dance in the sky and realized he couldn't win their game, so he invented his own unique tactic. His doctrine was simple and effective. First, use the P-38's powerful engines to climb above the enemy, always maintaining the altitude advantage. Second, convert that altitude into speed, diving on the target in a high-speed pass, giving the enemy no chance to react. Third, unleash the devastating firepower of the nose-mounted guns in one precise, controlled burst that guaranteed target destruction. Fourth, use his momentum to climb back to a safe altitude. Never linger, never dogfight. This was the boom and zoom principle that made him invincible. Imagine a situation where not just the outcome but life itself depends on your precision. When every second, every movement must be calibrated to the millimeter, Yet you repeatedly face the feeling that something is missing, that there's a secret eluding you. How often have you felt capable of achieving more, but some invisible barrier prevents you from becoming a true master of your craft? Today, we'll delve into the story of a man who not only overcame these barriers but rewrote the rules of the game under the deadliest conditions. Richard Bong, the legendary ace of World War II, transformed the chaos of aerial combat into an art of unerring surgical precision. But how did he do it? What were his unique techniques that allowed him to become a living legend, while others merely struggled to survive? And most importantly, what lessons can we learn from his approach to achieve our goals with such incredible effectiveness? Many considered him lucky, but in reality his successes were backed by a cold, calculating genius whose technique contradicted everything other pilots were taught. He didn't shoot where the target was at that moment, but where it would be a moment later. This principle is just the tip of the iceberg of his mastery, and in this video we will reveal his astonishing methods, starting right now with his unique perspective on aerial combat. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Richard Bong's combat reports were a direct reflection of his nature, concise, analytically precise, and strikingly effective. In them, he recorded altitude, tactical conditions of the engagement, and its final outcome. However, these dry lines couldn't convey the main thing, the hidden genius who performed miracles in the sky. While most pilots fired long, hopeful, but often useless bursts of ammunition, Bong acted completely differently. Footage from his gun camera, later meticulously studied by intelligence officers, revealed a terrifying sequence of actions. Patient pursuit, impeccable positioning, a short but furious burst of fire, and immediate disengagement. His squadron mates were absolutely thrilled. Major Thomas Lynch, another renowned ace, compared Bong's technique to a surgeon's work, patient, precise, and without a single wasted effort. His phenomenal efficiency in ammunition expenditure surpassed all conceivable limits. The key to his success was an innate understanding of deflection shooting. This art involves shooting not where the target is currently located, but where it will be. Most pilots struggled with this skill throughout their careers. For Bong, it was as natural as breathing. His kill count steadily grew. First one shoot down, then two in a single mission. Here a bomber, there a zero. He was a quiet, ghostly presence in the sky, appearing as if from nowhere, delivering deadly strikes with impeccable precision, and dissolving back into the blinding sun. Japanese analysts studying their losses began to notice a frightening pattern. Brutal, high-speed attacks from above by a twin-tailed devil. They gave the P-38 a terrifying nickname, the Fork-tailed Devil. And Richard Bong was its most terrifying embodiment. On the side of his P-38, he painted the name of his beloved Marge. This aircraft became a legendary sight in the Pacific sky, a harbinger of death for his enemies and a symbol of hope for the bomber crews he escorted. By early 1943, he had already achieved ace status. By the end of that year, his tally was growing at an astonishing rate, and the quiet farm boy was transforming into a living legend whose skill would soon transcend individual achievements. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. July 1943, over Leh Harbor, New Guinea. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of impending doom. A massive formation of Japanese bombers, escorted by a swarm of Zero fighters, rumbled towards Allied positions on the ground. To the soldiers cowering in their trenches, the sight seemed an unstoppable wave of destruction. But high above them, in the dazzling glare of the sun, Bong and his squadron gained altitude, preparing for the impending slaughter. This battle was to become a classic example of Bong's evolving genius. He was no longer just a lone wolf hunting in the skies. He became an orchestrator of aerial violence, a strategist capable of coordinating an entire group. Instead of rushing headlong into the fray, he held his group at a superior altitude, forcing the Japanese to look up at the shimmering glints. He waited with chilling patience until the enemy formation began its bombing run. He sought out that precise moment when a bomber would expose its vulnerable underbelly or a Zero would break formation. Only then did he give the order to attack. The P-38s dove from the sky like silver sharks, targeting their prey. Bong led the charge, his aircraft a mere blur of speed and purpose. He did not engage in maneuvering dogfights with the agile Zeros. He headed straight for the bombers, into the very heart of the enemy formation. One precise burst from his nose-mounted cannon, and a Mitsubishi bomber simply disintegrated in clouds of fire and black smoke. He didn't linger to watch the debris fall. Bong was already climbing, converting his speed back into precious altitude advantage, scanning for his next victim. His squadron followed his lead, striking like lightning and vanishing instantly, sowing chaos and confusion among Japanese pilots who couldn't track the faster, more powerful American fighters. The results were devastating. Numerous enemy aircraft were destroyed with minimal Allied losses. Japanese combat reports from this period are filled with a sense of terror, describing encounters with American fighters that attacked with a speed and precision they simply could not counter. The enemy already knew they were being hunted by true experts. By November 1943, Richard Bong had achieved 21 confirmed victories. This was not just an impressive number, it was a historic event. He was now one of America's greatest aces, a celebrity in a war that desperately needed heroes. General Kenny, always a shrewd commander, fully understood the value of such a symbol. He personally awarded Bong the Distinguished Service Cross. And then he did the one thing Bong hated most. He sent him home. Bong was ordered back to the United States for a war bond tour. Suddenly, the quiet pilot, who was used to letting his flying speak for itself, was thrust into the spotlight. He was celebrated by cheering crowds. His face graced newspaper pages from New York to California. The American public embraced him. He was the humble farm boy who became a dragon slayer, the embodiment of American ingenuity and courage. But Bong was miserable. He despised the ceremonies, the speeches, the endless handshakes. In letters to Marge, he confessed that his heart remained in the Pacific. Beside the pilots, who were still fighting and dying, he felt like a fraud, a show pony, while his brothers in arms were in the thick of the action. He relentlessly appealed to General Kenny, practically begging to be sent back into combat, anticipating a new chapter in his flying career. Finally, Kenny relented. By March 1944, Bong was back in New Guinea, and a pleasant surprise awaited him. A new, upgraded P-38J Lightning. This was a significantly improved machine for aerial combat. It featured enhanced engines, a more effective cockpit heating system for high-altitude flights, and most importantly, hydraulically boosted ailerons. This innovation provided the P-38 with much better maneuverability at high speeds, eliminating one of its most significant weaknesses. In Bong's hands, the P-38J was more than just a fighter. It was a scalpel, an instrument of exquisite destruction. He returned to a different war. Years of brutal attrition had taken their toll on the Japanese Air Force. Many of their veteran pilots had died, replaced by younger men with limited training and few flight hours. The experience gap between the two sides had widened into a chasm. For an American ace like Bong, with hundreds of hours of combat experience, encountering these new pilots was often, tragically, like a hawk meeting a sparrow. His tactical approach continued to evolve. He perfected the head-on attack, a maneuver that required unimaginable courage. Most pilots would break off early, intimidated by the threat of a mid-air collision. Bong, however, held his course, his eyes locked on the enemy, firing until the last possible second. The closing speed exceeded 800 miles per hour. The window for hitting the target was less than a second. Bong's gun camera footage shows him repeatedly flying directly through the debris of his victims, further emphasizing his fearlessness and unparalleled skill. Imagine a man whose name became a legend in his own lifetime, whose exploits struck terror into his enemies and instilled hope in the hearts of his countrymen. A man who single-handedly changed the course of aerial battles, achieving what seems statistically impossible. How could such a thing happen? What secrets lay behind his phenomenal success, allowing him to emerge victorious from the deadliest engagements? And what compelled him to keep fighting where any other pilot would have long since retreated? Perhaps you've encountered situations where everything seemed against you, where every step forward was an immense struggle, and circumstances pressed in from all sides. You felt cornered, almost broken, and didn't know how to break through a string of failures. But what if we told you there's a way, a special strategy that allows you not just to survive, but to dominate, even in the most hopeless conditions? Today, we're not just unveiling the story of America's greatest ace, but 3 key principles that enabled him to achieve the utterly unthinkable. And the first of these might just revolutionize your understanding of what it means to be a fighter. They say that in war the most aggressive and reckless survive. But what if cold calculation, discipline, and the ability to see the game several moves ahead, rather than blind fury, were the key to absolute superiority? We're here not just to tell you facts, but to show how these principles can be applied not only in the sky, but in your own life. Stay with us and watch until the end, because we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And, of course, tell us in the comments where you're watching us from. By mid-1944, as the calendar turned to June, fate was already preparing its next move. In the skies over New Guinea, during another combat mission, Bong managed to send his 27th and 28th enemy aircraft crashing to the ground. This moment was a turning point. He didn't just win a victory, he surpassed the legendary Eddie Rickenbacker, a World War I hero whose record stood at 26 downed planes. Richard Ira Bong was now officially America's greatest living fighter ace. General Kenny, his commander, felt both immense pride and deep concern. He immediately grounded Bong from regular combat sorties, declaring him too valuable to risk. Bong, the general asserted, was a true national treasure, and his loss would be a catastrophic blow to the nation's morale. Bong was furious. Grounded and deeply frustrated, he persistently argued that his true place was in the sky, leading his men into battle. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Kenny allowed him to fly, but only on particularly important missions and exclusively as a flight leader, where he could direct the fight rather than simply be one of its participants. He became a kind of general in the skies. These restrictions, however, did not slow him down in the slightest. In fact, flying priority missions often meant he was sent precisely where the fighting was most ferocious and demanded maximum effort. It was precisely in such conditions that his true potential was unleashed. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we would be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you are watching us from. October 1944 arrived, the setting, Balikpapan, Borneo. Bong and his flight faced a critically important task, escorting B-24 bombers destined to strike vital Japanese oil refineries. The Japanese threw all their forces at the American formation, desperately trying to protect their fuel supplies. The sky erupted in a swirling chaos of aerial combat. Bong, leading his P-38s, positioned his formation with the sun at their backs, a classic tactic to blind the enemy. He led the first attack, diving from above and knocking an enemy fighter out of the sky. But as he pulled up, his own aircraft was rocked by a violent explosion. An enemy fighter had gotten on his tail. Cannon shells ripped through his right engine. Warning lights flashed on the instrument panel. The engine sputtered, caught fire, and failed completely. Most pilots in such a situation would immediately disengage, heading home on one engine. It would have been reasonable. It would have been sane. But Richard Bong, at that moment, was neither reasonable nor sane in the usual sense. He was a predator. He feathered the dead propeller to reduce drag, activated the fire extinguisher, and calmly assessed the situation. The plane was still flying. His guns were still working, and there were still enemies in the sky. With his damaged P-38 trailing a smoke plume, he turned the heavy fighter back into the dogfight. On one engine, with severely degraded performance, he hunted down another Japanese fighter and shot it down. Only then did he turn for home, guiding his battered aircraft across hundreds of miles of open ocean. When he landed, the ground crew was horrified. His P-38 was riddled with bullet holes, and an entire engine was utterly destroyed. They declared the aircraft unserviceable, destined for the scrap heap. But they underestimated the deep bond between a pilot and his machine. Bong personally supervised the repairs, and within weeks he was flying his beloved Marge once more. This single incident cemented his legend. He was not merely skilled, he was fearless. He was not just an ace, he was unyielding, and his resolve only grew stronger. After that fateful day, his tally of victories inexorably climbed towards a number no one had ever thought possible: 35, 36, 38. By December 1944, he had 40 confirmed aerial victories. This number was staggering, an achievement so far beyond the norm that it barely seemed real. In the United States, at the very highest levels of command, a final decision was made. General Douglas MacArthur himself issued a direct order to General Kenney. This was no longer a request. It was a demand. Richard Bong was to be permanently grounded from flying. His war was over. He was simply too valuable a symbol to risk his life. America's ace of aces was being sent home for good, whether he liked it or not. His last combat mission occurred on December 17, 1944. It was an unremarkable patrol, resulting in no enemy contact. Without ceremony, the combat career of the most successful fighter pilot in American history came to an end. But his story was just beginning. He returned to the United States, not to the quiet farm he had dreamed of, but to a whirlwind of national adoration, to a nation weary of war. Richard Bong was more than just a pilot. He had become an icon of hope, a symbol of the quiet, resolute strength that would ultimately win the war. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor. In the hallowed halls of the Pentagon, Secretary of War Henry Stimson placed the medal around his neck. The official citation was read aloud, a dry military recounting of deeds bordering on the incredible. It spoke of his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty. It mentioned his unwavering courage and brilliant leadership, and his relentless pursuit of the enemy, even when outnumbered and facing the fiercest resistance. Bong stood there, characteristically quiet and humble, looking almost awkward in his dress uniform. This was a man who communicated through action, not words, who felt more comfortable in the cramped cockpit of a P-38 at 20,000 feet than in a room full of generals and politicians. After the ceremonies, he finally found a moment of peace. On February 10, 1945, he married his sweetheart, Marge Vattendahl, in a church in Superior, Wisconsin. For a brief moment, America's deadliest ace was simply a husband, a young man hoping to build a life far from the scream of diving planes and the flash of cannon fire. The war in Europe was in its final bloody throes, and the end of the global conflict finally seemed near. But one question remained: how exactly did he achieve all of this? But what was the true secret to his phenomenal success? How did one man in one specific aircraft achieve a record that seems statistically impossible? The answer lies in a unique combination of the man himself, his machine, and a tactical doctrine that was years ahead of its time. Post-war analysis by Army Air Force's experts and a meticulous study of his gun camera footage revealed a level of accuracy that was simply breathtaking. Bong's hit percentage, the ratio of bullets fired to targets destroyed, was extraordinarily high, far surpassing that of the average pilot. He didn't waste ammunition. He didn't rely on luck or chance. He relied on a cold calculation of speed, angle, and timing that was ingrained in his very being. His early life as a hunter, tracking prey in the woods, had trained his mind to see the world in terms of lead, deflection, and one perfect shot. His tactical philosophy, honed over more than 200 combat sorties, became the gold standard for American fighter pilots in the Pacific. It was a doctrine built on discipline, not aggression. While other pilots were drawn into swirling close-in dogfights, the kind of romantic duels depicted in movies, Bong understood that this was suicide against the nimble Japanese Zero. His system was a brutal science, and it was what brought him to the top. When it comes to outstanding individuals whose names are forever etched in aviation history, it's impossible to overlook Richard Bong. This man, whose life was like a swift flight, left behind not only record-breaking achievements, but also invaluable lessons in skill and resilience. But what exactly made him so unique? How did he manage to emerge victorious from the most desperate battles? And why did his journey end so tragically, just when all dangers seemed to be behind him? Have you ever felt like you're on the threshold of something grand yet simultaneously daunting? That you're about to master a completely new field where the old rules no longer apply? Richard Bong, the legendary ace, experienced precisely this when he transitioned from piston-powered aircraft to the jet era. He was at the pinnacle, yet he had to become a student once again. And if this feeling resonates with you, then his story will surely touch your soul. Because each of us has faced moments when we had to learn something entirely new, stepping out of our comfort zone. And it is in such moments that we can draw inspiration from the experiences of those who have already walked that path. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we would be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching us from. In his air combat tactics, Richard Bong adhered to several key principles that he transformed into a true science. He gave paramount importance to energy. Bong always sought to maintain an energy advantage, utilizing superiority in altitude and speed. His P-38 was an unrivaled high-altitude fighter, and Bong masterfully used this feature to dictate the course of every battle, always remaining the initiator of the attack. The second important aspect was positioning. He expertly used the sun, clouds, and even the enemy's formation to gain the most advantageous position, even before a single shot was fired. Bong was a true maestro of patient hunting, sometimes maneuvering for extended periods to achieve the perfect angle of attack. The third principle was firepower. He relied on the P-38's concentrated nose armament. Bong was well aware that if he could bring his guns to bear on a target for even a fraction of a second, the outcome of the battle would be decided. The fourth, but no less important aspect, was discipline. He never attempted to engage in turning maneuvers with Japanese Zeros. After an attack pass, Bong used his superior speed to exit the engagement, gaining altitude and preparing for the next strike. He waged a vertical war, a battle of energy and physics, while his opponents were still fighting on a horizontal plane. And finally, the aircraft itself. The P-38 Lightning was the ideal instrument for his unique style of warfare. Its twin-engine configuration provided a vital level of redundancy. This fighter could withstand incredible damage and still bring its pilot home, as Bong repeatedly proved, for example, over Borneo. Its tricycle landing gear made it stable on the rough, improvised airstrips of the Pacific Islands, and its turbochargers provided high-altitude performance that many Japanese fighters simply could not match. In the hands of an ordinary pilot, the P-38 was simply a capable fighter. But in Richard Bong's hands, it transformed into a weapon of historic significance. The letters he wrote to his beloved Marge revealed the true man behind the legend. He rarely spoke of his victories. Instead, he wrote about his duty, his focus on efficiently getting the job done, on protecting bomber formations, and supporting ground troops. He saw his role not as a glory-seeking ace, but as a protector, a guardian for those who relied on him. There was no ego, no bravado, only the quiet, deadly efficiency of a master of his craft. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we would be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching us from. As 1945 dawned, Bong's life should have been filled with safety and prestige. He was a hero, a husband, and a symbol of American victory. But the warrior in him couldn't stay out of the cockpit. The military, eager to utilize his unprecedented experience, gave him a new assignment. He was to become a test pilot. This was a new challenge awaiting him on the horizon. The world of aviation stood on the brink of revolution. Piston engines, which had dominated the skies for 40 years, were rapidly becoming obsolete. A new, terrifyingly powerful technology was emerging. The jet engine, developed at Lockheed's secret Skunk Works division in Burbank, California. Kelly Johnson, the very man who designed the P-38, had created America's first operational jet fighter, the P-80 Shooting Star. This event marked the beginning of a new era in aviation. The P-80 was the future, a sleek, futuristic machine with a single jet engine that produced 4,000 pounds of thrust, propelling it to speeds over 500 miles per hour. This was an entirely new mode of flight, a true quantum leap in performance and technology. The Army needed its best and most experienced pilots to tame this new beast, to write the rulebook for a new era of air combat. Richard Bong, master of piston fighters, was tasked with helping usher in the age of jets. He was transitioning from the pinnacle of one generation of technology to the very beginning of the next. He was once again on the front lines, but this time the enemy was not a zero in his sights. It was the unknown. The assignment to test the P-80 Shooting Star placed Richard Bong at the epicenter of a technological earthquake. He, who had mastered the most complex piston fighter ever built, was once again a student. The P-80 was an entirely different beast. It had no propeller, no torque, just the roaring thrust of a jet engine. It reacted differently, landed at terrifyingly high speeds, and climbed into the sky as if pulled by an invisible hand. Every pilot transitioning to jets was, in the very literal sense, a pioneer, exploring a dangerous and uncharted frontier. Bong, with his innate mechanical sense, adapted quickly. He respected the new aircraft, studying its systems with the same quiet intensity he applied to combat tactics. He was no longer a manhunter, but a machine explorer, pushing the boundaries of what was possible and reporting his findings to the engineers who were literally inventing the future of aviation. For several months, this was his new life, a life of flight logs, technical briefings, and the constant high-pitched whine of a jet turbine. Then came August 6, 1945. It was a hot, clear summer day at the Lockheed Air Terminal in Burbank, California. For Major Richard Bong, it was a routine workday. He was scheduled to perform a standard acceptance flight on a new P-80 fresh off the assembly line. He conducted his pre-flight checks, donned his gear, and climbed into the cockpit of the futuristic machine. The canopy slid shut, sealing him inside. The P-80's engine spooled up with its distinctive whine. Bong taxied onto the runway, received clearance, and pushed the throttle forward. The jet accelerated rapidly, pinning him against his seat, and gracefully lifted into the California sky. But just moments after takeoff, something went catastrophically wrong. The primary fuel pump failed. The engine, starved of fuel, flamed out. Below him, the sprawling suburbs of Los Angeles stretched to the horizon. He was at a critically low altitude with no power in a machine that, without an engine, flew like a brick. For a man who had survived 200 combat sorties, who had faced swarms of enemy fighters, who had brought a damaged P-38 home on one engine, this was his last, most desperate battle, Brett. It was a battle against gravity and time. He fought for control. His training kicked in. He attempted emergency restart procedures, but there wasn't enough altitude. He tried to glide the powerless aircraft back to the runway, but he couldn't make it. In the last fleeting seconds of his life, as the ground rushed up towards him, he made one final decision. He attempted to eject, but it was too late. He was too low. The P-80 slammed into a field and exploded in a fireball. Major Richard Ira Bong, the ace of aces, the farm boy from Wisconsin, the deadliest American fighter pilot in history, died instantly. He was 24 years old. Have you ever considered how swiftly the world changes, sometimes mercilessly sweeping away familiar foundations? How a single event, a single moment, can erase an entire era, making yesterday's heroes seem like part of a distant past? Perhaps you too have experienced your efforts, your expertise, your field of work suddenly threatened by obsolescence, as if yesterday's meaning has been lost. Today we will delve into such a story that unfolded on one of the most dramatic days in the annals of humankind. It was August 6, 1945. On that fateful day, high above the clear skies of Japan, an American B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay flew. Its bomb bay doors opened, and a single, strangely shaped weapon dropped into the abyss. It fell upon the city of Hiroshima. In a blinding flash of light, the city was obliterated, and the world was forever changed, having learned the terrifying power of the atom. This day became a point of no return, dividing history into before and after. And on that very same day, half a world away in the U.S., Richard Bong, America's greatest fighter pilot, a man whose name had become synonymous with valor in aerial combat, tragically died. He was only 24 years old. His passing, the death of a master of traditional aerial warfare, was buried beneath colossal global headlines proclaiming the dawn of the atomic age. What an irony of fate! An outstanding ace, whose 40 confirmed victories made him an undisputed hero, perished on the very day his type of warfare was rendered obsolete. How could it be that the death of a national hero became merely secondary news, buried in the shadow of an unprecedented force? And why is his departure, coinciding with the dawn of a new era, not just a coincidence, but a poignant symbol? In this narrative, we will not only uncover the story of Richard Bong, his incredible feats, and his tactical methods, but also attempt to understand how his legacy has withstood the test of time, even though the world he knew vanished in a blinding flash. Prepare for a tale of a man whose life was the embodiment of heroism, whose death heralded global change, and whose legend remains unshaken even as his battlefields have long fallen silent. Stay with us and watch until the end, as you will discover many more amazing things. We would be especially grateful for a like and a subscription, and if you tell us in the comments where you're watching us from, it will be a priceless gift to us. Nearly 8 decades later, Richard Bong's phenomenal record, 40 confirmed aerial victories, remains unsurpassed. It is an achievement that in all likelihood will stand inviolable throughout history. The modern realities of air combat, transformed into a sterile process dominated by radar screens and missiles striking targets beyond visual range, will never revive the close-in visual dogfights that defined World War II. The era when pilots became legendary gunfighter aces has irrevocably passed into history. However, Bong's true greatness and the full scope of his influence extended far beyond the mere number of 40 enemy aircraft he destroyed. His real value lay in the bomber crews he tirelessly escorted to safety, in the hope he instilled in ground troops who looked to the skies for his protective shadow. But most importantly, his impact was in the tactical doctrine he developed, which saved the lives of countless other pilots. The methods honed by this virtuoso airman became the foundation of American fighter tactics, shaping their development for decades to come. We're almost at the end of this captivating narrative, but before we continue, we once again ask you to stay with us and watch the video until the very end. Your support through likes and subscriptions is invaluable to us, and we would be especially grateful if you'd share in the comments where you are watching us from. General George Kenney, a discerning commander who saw the true genius behind the facade of a daring rule-breaker, later recorded calling Bong the greatest fighter pilot he had ever encountered. Kenney emphasized that Bong's astonishing success was not rooted in reckless aggression, but rather its complete opposite, in cool, calculated precision. He transformed deadly engagements into something seemingly effortless because he perfectly mastered reliable, repeatable tactical principles. Today, at the Richard I Bong Veterans Historical Center, located in his home state of Wisconsin, the Heroes Medal of Honor is presented in a modest yet significant exhibit. Beside it, as a silent tribute to the man and his legendary warbird, stands a restored P-38 proudly named Marge on its nose. These are not just museum exhibits. They are a powerful reminder of an era when a quiet young man from the American Midwest could step into a fighter cockpit, and through exceptional talent and iron discipline, not merely fight, but change the course of history. The battlefields where his exploits once thundered are now enveloped in silence. The skies that witnessed his fearless engagements now seem empty. Yet his incredible record remains indelibly etched in the annals of military history. 40 victories, 200 combat missions. These are not just figures, they are facets of an unbreakable legend. The story of a simple country boy who ascended to the status of America's deadliest and most elusive ace continues to inspire decades later.